So there I was, standing on my own dock, fishing rod in hand, when this woman in a pristine white SUV pulls up and starts screaming about HOA violations. Apparently, I was disrupting the aesthetic harmony of the waterfront community by get this fishing on my own property. What she didn't know was that I just sold my tech startup for 8 figures, and I was about to make her life very, very interesting. By the end of this story, I owned the entire lake, banned her from ever setting foot on the water again, and turned her precious HOA into a laughingstock. You think that's crazy? Wait until you hear what I did with the fishing tournament. If you've ever dealt with an HOA power trip, you're going to love how this ends. And if you stick around until the end, I'll tell you about the time Linda Morrison tried to call the police on a family of ducks. Let me take you back to where this all started. After 15 years of grinding in Silicon Valley, sleeping on couches, and living off ramen noodles, I finally made it. My cybersecurity app got acquired by a major tech company, and suddenly I had more money than I knew what to do with. The first thing I did, I bought my dream property. Picture this, a rustic log cabin right on the edge of Crystal Lake, about 2 hours north of the city. The place came with its own private dock, a boat slip, and the most incredible view you've ever seen. Every morning, I'd wake up to mist rising off the water, eagles circling overhead, and absolute silence except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I spent my first month there just decompressing. I'd sit on the dock with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. Sometimes I'd take my little fishing boat out and just drift, listening to nothing but my own thoughts for the first time in years. The cabin itself was perfect. Exposed wooden beams, stone, fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. I had a home office where I could freelance when I wanted to, but mostly, I just existed. The kitchen had everything I needed to cook my catch of the day, and there was something deeply satisfying about eating fish I'd caught myself while watching the sunset from my dining room table. I grilled fish I caught myself, read books I'd been meaning to read for years, and finally felt like I could breathe again. I discovered I was pretty good at identifying different bird calls, learned to read weather patterns on the water, and even started a small garden behind the cabin. My daily routine became sacred. Wake up at sunrise, coffee on the dock, check the weather and water conditions, decide whether to fish from the dock or take the boat out. Some days, I'd catch enough for dinner. Other days, I'd come back empty-handed but completely relaxed. It didn't matter. The process itself was the reward. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly filled with other cabins and vacation homes. I'd wave to my neighbors when I saw them, but everyone seemed to respect that we'd all come here for the peace and quiet. There was old Bill next door, who'd been coming to the lake for 20 years, always had a friendly wave and sometimes shared stories about the big bass he'd caught. The Johnson family across the cove had the kids who'd kayak around in the evenings, their laughter echoing across the water. Then there was Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived in the small cabin up the hill. She'd been coming to the lake for 30 years and had the most beautiful flower garden I'd ever seen. Sometimes she'd bring me vegetables from her garden, and I'd return the favor with fresh fish. I started developing routines. Tuesday mornings were for long fishing sessions. I'd pack a thermos of coffee, some sandwiches, and just disappear onto the water for hours. Thursday evenings I'd fire up the grill on my deck and cook whatever I'd caught that week. Weekends were for maintenance, keeping the dock in good shape, splitting wood for the fireplace, all the satisfying work that comes with owning a place like this. The local bait shop owner, Pete, got to know me pretty quickly. He'd always have the best advice about where the fish were biting and what lures to use. "Lake's been good to you, Mike," he'd say whenever I'd come in with stories about my latest catch. Fish can tell when someone respects the water. Pete had been running his shop for 15 years and knew everyone who fished the lake. He'd tell me stories about the old days, before the neighborhood got built up, when it was just a few fishing cabins and people who understood lake life. I was learning to respect more than just the water. I was learning to respect quiet mornings, the satisfaction of cooking your own catch, the way stress just melted away when you were focused on nothing but a fishing line and your own thoughts. For 3 blissful months, this was my paradise. Then Hurricane Karen arrived. I first noticed her on a Tuesday morning, what should have been one of my perfect fishing mornings. I was sitting on my dock, coffee in one hand, fishing rod in the other, when I heard this engine roaring up the gravel road. Not just any engine, the kind of aggressive SUV engine that announces its owner has opinions about everything. She pulled up to my property line in this massive white Escalade, so clean it looked like it had been detailed that morning. The thing was spotless, not a single speck of dirt or dust, which was weird because everyone else's cars around here picked up at least some lake dust. This was a vehicle that existed to make a statement, and that statement was, "I'm more important than you." The engine cut off with an aggressive rumble, and out stepped this woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Real Housewives audition. Perfect blonde hair despite the early hour, designer activewear that probably costs more than most people's rent, and these enormous sunglasses that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager," from 50 yards away. She had that particular walk, you know, the one where every step is calculated to demonstrate authority over whatever space she's entering. But it was the clipboard that really caught my attention. This wasn't just any clipboard. This was a professional-grade clipboard with multiple forms, a pen attached by a chain, and what looked like a measuring tape hanging from the side. This woman had come prepared for battle. She marched down to my dock like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, heels clicking on the wooden planks. The sound echoed across the water, disturbing the peaceful morning quiet that I'd grown to love. I'm still sitting there, minding my own business, when she clears her throat behind me. "Excuse me," she says, and I could already hear the condescension dripping from her voice. "I'm Linda Morrison, president of the Crystal Lake Homeowners Association. We need to talk." I turned around, still holding my fishing rod, and gave her my most polite smile. "Good morning. I'm Mike. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She wasn't having it. Her eyes were already scanning my setup like she was taking inventory for a lawsuit. She looked at my fishing rod, my tackle box, my small cooler, my comfortable deck chair, and I could practically see her making mental notes about each item. "Sir, you're in violation of multiple HOA guidelines, and frankly, I'm shocked that no one has addressed this sooner. Now, I should mention that when I bought this place, I specifically chose a property that wasn't part of any HOA. I dealt with enough micromanaging in the corporate world. I wasn't about to pay someone to tell me what color I could paint my own house. I'd specifically asked my realtor, Jennifer, to make sure this property was HOA free. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property, in part of any HOA." Linda's face got that special kind of red that only comes from someone who's used to being obeyed without question. She flipped through her clipboard like she was shuffling through evidence in a murder trial. "According to our records, all properties within 500 feet of Crystal Lake fall under our jurisdiction for aesthetic and environmental protection purposes." I could feel my peaceful morning evaporating. This woman was literally trying to invent jurisdiction over my property. "Mum, I can assure you that my property deed says nothing about any HOA. I specifically bought here to avoid exactly this kind of situation." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of me, my dock, my fishing gear, everything. Click, click, click. The sound was aggressive, invasive, like she was documenting a crime scene. "Don't you dare take pictures of me or my property without permission," I said, standing up. "I have every right to document HOA violations," she replied, still clicking away. "This is for the protection of the community." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, which was apparently the worst thing I could have done. "Ma'am, I can assure you that my property deed says nothing about any HOA. I specifically bought here to avoid exactly this kind of situation. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of me, my dock, my fishing gear, everything. Click, 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 unauthorized fishing activities from private docks, she muttered, typing notes, non-compliant dock lighting, unapproved watercraft mooring, and this ... She gestured at my perfectly normal fishing setup. ... This is creating an eyesore that affects property values for the entire community. The absurdity of it hit me. Here I was, sitting peacefully on my own dock, and this woman was treating me like I was running some kind of illegal operation. My fishing rod was a mid-range Shimano, nothing fancy. My tackle box was organized and clean. My small aluminum boat was tied up properly and maintained. You're telling me I can't fish from my own dock? Not without proper permits and adherence to our community aesthetic guidelines. The HOA has very specific rules about recreational activities visible from the water. You're creating a rustic fishing camp atmosphere that conflicts with our upscale lakefront community vision. She handed me a stack of papers. Here are your violation notices. You have 7 days to remove all fishing equipment, upgrade your dock lighting to community standards, and submit an application for any future recreational activities. I looked at the papers. 3 separate violation notices, each with a $500 fine, $1,500 for fishing on my own property, and, if I don't, her smile was pure poison. Then we'll see you in court. We have a very good track record with non-compliant property owners. She turned to leave, then paused like she was delivering a final blow. Oh, and Mr. Mike, I should mention that continued violations could result in a lien on your property. We take our community standards very seriously here. The lien threat was what really got to me. A lien could complicate selling the property, could affect my credit, could turn into a real legal nightmare. This woman was threatening to put a financial stranglehold on my property because I had the audacity to fish from my own dock. She clip-clopped back to her pristine SUV, leaving me standing on my dock holding violation notices for the crime of fishing in peace. As she drove away, I noticed something. She drove slowly past 3 other properties, taking more pictures. Whatever crusade Linda Morrison was on, I wasn't her only target. I walked back to my dock, but the peaceful morning was ruined. The coffee had gone cold, the fish had probably been scared away by all the commotion, and I was left holding violation notices that threatened to put a lien on my property. That afternoon, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I walked around the neighborhood, talking to people I'd only waved to before. What I discovered made my blood boil. Mrs. Chen was the first person I talked to. She invited me in for tea, and I could see she'd been crying. "Oh, Mike," she said, "that woman has been making my life miserable for 2 years. She fined me for having too many flowers in my garden, said it was inconsistent with the natural lakefront aesthetic." Mrs. Chen had been forced to remove half of her beautiful flower garden, the garden she'd been tending for 30 years. She made me get rid of my bird feeders too, said they were attracting too much wildlife and creating noise pollution. I've been feeding those birds for decades. They were my friends. I was furious. This woman had been coming to the lake for 30 years, and Linda Morrison had destroyed her simple pleasures because of some made-up aesthetic standards. I stood there for a long time after she left, just staring at those papers. You have to understand, this wasn't just about the money. $1,500 was nothing to me at that point. This was about something deeper. I'd spent 15 years of my life building something from nothing. I'd worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificed relationships, missed family events. Also, I could have exactly this, a place where I could exist without someone telling me what to do. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd escaped the corporate world where every decision had to be approved by committee, where every creative idea got buried under layers of bureaucracy and risk assessment. I'd thought I'd found freedom, but here was Linda Morrison, creating her own little bureaucracy around a lake, complete with violation notices and court threats. I'd specifically chosen this property because it represented freedom. Freedom from corporate politics, freedom from city noise, freedom from people who thought they knew better than me how I should live my life. And now, here was Linda Morrison, telling me I couldn't fish from my own dock because it didn't fit her vision of what a lakefront community should look like. I thought about my dad, who taught me to fish when I was 7 years old. We'd spend entire Saturdays on various lakes and rivers, him teaching me about patience, about reading the water, about the satisfaction of providing for yourself. He died 5 years ago, and some of my best memories were of us sitting on various docks and river banks, just talking and waiting for the fish to bite. This wasn't just a hobby for me. It was a connection to something important. It was meditation, therapy, and family tradition all rolled into one. But Linda Morrison thought it was an eyesore. I went inside and did what any reasonable person would do in 2024. I Googled the hell out of the Crystal Lake HOA. What I found was ... interesting ... turns out. Linda Morrison had been terrorizing property owners around the lake for 3 years. There were forum posts, complaint websites, even a Facebook group called Crystal Lake HOA Survivors with over 200 members sharing horror stories. The stories were incredible. She'd fined someone $750 for having a doormat that was the wrong shade of brown. She'd forced a family to repaint their entire cabin because the stain was too rustic for the community aesthetic. She'd actually tried to ban barbecue grills because the smoke was inconsistent with our upscale lakefront atmosphere. She'd sued 12 different property owners in the past 2 years alone. Most of them had settled rather than fight, because legal fees add up fast when you're dealing with someone who has nothing better to do than file paperwork. But here's the thing Linda Morrison didn't know about me. I just spent 15 years dealing with people who tried to intimidate me with legal threats. I'd been through patent disputes, contract negotiations, and hostile takeover attempts. I'd faced down venture capitalists who tried to steal my company and competitors who filed frivolous lawsuits just to slow me down. I knew how to play hardball. More importantly, I had the resources to play hardball. That evening, I called my neighbor, Bill. I figured if Linda Morrison was targeting me, she'd probably targeted him too. "Oh, Mike," he said, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. "You got a visit from Hurricane Linda, huh?" Hurricane Linda, that's what we call her. She's been making life miserable for everyone around here. I've been coming to this lake for 20 years. Never had a problem until she showed up. Has she gone after you? 3 times. First time was for my dock lights. Apparently, they weren't the right color temperature. Had to spend $400 replacing perfectly good lights with ones that met her community standards. Bill told me about the second violation. She cited me for storing my kayak on my dock instead of in some approved storage facility. Mike, I've been keeping my kayak on my dock for 20 years. Never been a problem for anyone. What about the third time? That was the worst one. She fined me for having a fish cleaning station that was visible from the water. I built that cleaning station myself 15 years ago. It's where I clean my catch, rinse my gear, all that. She said it was creating an unsanitary appearance and degrading the upscale lakefront atmosphere. I could feel my blood pressure rising. What did you do? What could I do? I'm 73 years old, Mike. I don't have the energy or the money to fight her in court. I moved my kayak, changed my lights, and got rid of the fish cleaning station. Now I have to clean my fish in my kitchen like some kind of criminal. The resignation in his voice broke my heart. This man had been enjoying the lake peacefully for 20 years, and Linda Morrison had systematically stripped away everything he loved about the experience. Bill, what if I told you there might be a way to fight back? Mike, I appreciate the thought, but she's got lawyers. She's got money. She's got time. People like us, we just have to keep our heads down and hope she doesn't notice us. After I hung up, I sat on my deck, staring out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and pink that should have been peaceful. Instead, I was furious. Linda Morrison hadn't just violated my property rights. She terrorized an entire community of people who'd come to the lake for the same thing I had: peace. I made a decision that night. Linda Morrison had picked the wrong person to mess with. The next morning, I made a phone call to my lawyer. "Hey, Sarah, it's Mike. I need you to research something for me. I want to know everything about Crystal Lake. Who owns it, what the zoning laws are, and whether there's any way to purchase it. Purchase ... the lake. The whole lake." There was a pause. "Mike, are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling like I want to own a lake. Can you look into it?" Sarah had been my lawyer through the startup acquisition, so she was used to my unconventional requests, but this one clearly caught her off guard. "You want to buy a lake because of an HOA dispute." "I want to buy a lake because I can, and because Linda Morrison is about to learn a very expensive lesson about picking fights with the wrong person." "Mike, you realize how insane this sounds, right?" "Sarah, 3 years ago you thought I was insane for turning down a $20 million acquisition offer. How did that work out?" She laughed. "Point taken. You sold for $80 million 6 months later." "Exactly. I've learned to trust my instincts about when to go big." This is one of those times. 3 days later, Sarah called me back. "Mike, you're not going to believe this. Crystal Lake is actually owned by the state, but they've been trying to sell it for budget reasons. It's been on the market for 8 months with no takers because of the asking price." "How much?" $12 million. I was quiet for a moment, doing the math. $12 million was about 15% of my net worth after the acquisition. A big purchase, but not a crazy one. "Sarah, make an offer." "Full asking price. Cash. Close in 30 days. "Mike, that's insane. You're going to buy a lake because of an HOA dispute." "I'm going to buy a lake because I can, and because Linda Morrison is about to learn that when you mess with someone's peace, sometimes they have the resources to mess with yours." Sarah laughed. "You know what? I've seen you make crazier baits that paid off. Let me make some calls. And Sarah, I want you to research something else. I want to know everything about Linda Morrison. Her background, her finances, her legal history, everything. If I'm going to war, I want to know my enemy." The research on Linda Morrison was ... illuminating. Turns out she'd been a real estate agent before becoming the self-appointed HOA president. She'd been sued twice for misrepresenting properties and had her license suspended for 6 months. She'd also been involved in 3 other HOA disputes in different communities before moving to Crystal Lake. This wasn't her first rodeo. She was a professional troublemaker who got off on controlling other people's lives. But she'd never tangled with someone who had the resources to buy her playground. The paperwork moved fast when you're paying cash and not asking for inspections or contingencies. The state was thrilled to have a buyer who didn't want to negotiate or drag out the process. I had environmental lawyers review everything to make sure I understood exactly what I was buying and what my rights would be. 3 weeks later, I owned Crystal Lake, all 847 acres of it. The water, the lake bed, the fishing rights, the mineral rights, everything. I spent the next week with environmental lawyers, making sure I understood exactly what my ownership rights were. Turns out, when you own a lake, you have a lot of power over who gets to use it. The day after the purchase closed, I drove to the county courthouse and filed some paperwork of my own. New lake usage rules, access restrictions, and a few other surprises I'd been planning. On a beautiful Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after Linda Morrison had handed me those violation notices, I was back on my dock with my coffee and fishing rod when I heard a familiar engine roaring up the gravel road. She parked and marched down to my dock, clipboard in hand, looking even more self-righteous than before. "Mr. Mike, I see you've chosen to ignore our violation notices. I'm here to inform you that we're proceeding with legal action, and I have a court order requiring you to cease all fishing activities immediately. I set down my coffee and smiled. Linda, I'm so glad you're here. I have something to show you. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of a very official-looking document. This is the deed to Crystal Lake. I bought it 3 weeks ago. I now own the entire lake. Her face went through several interesting color changes. Pale white, then red, then a kind of purple I'd never seen on a human face before. That's impossible. It's really not. And as the owner of this lake, I have some new rules I'd like to share with you. I pulled out my own clipboard. I'd been waiting for this moment. First, Linda Morrison and all members of the Crystal Lake HOA board are hereby banned from accessing any part of Crystal Lake for recreational purposes. This includes swimming, boating, fishing, and any other water activities. She started to sputter something about property rights, but I kept going. Second, any property owner who has received violation notices from the Crystal Lake HOA in the past 3 years now has my express written permission to use the lake however they want, whenever they want. Fish, boat, swim, whatever. My lake. My rules. You can't do this. Actually, I can. I own the lake. Linda, you want to control what happens on the water. You should have bought the water. I handed her a copy of the new lake usage rules I'd filed with the county. These are the new regulations. As you can see, fishing from private docks is not only allowed, it's encouraged. In fact, I'm considering hosting a fishing tournament next month. She grabbed the papers and started reading, her face getting redder with each line. Furthermore, I continued, I've hired a property management company to patrol the lake and ensure compliance with the new rules. Any HOA board member found on the water will be cited for trespassing. Linda Morrison's face went through several more color changes as she read the document. This is impossible. You can't just buy a lake and ban people from using it. Actually, I can. It's called property rights. Linda, the same property rights you've been violating for 3 years. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of the wire transfer confirmation. $12 million. Cash. Closed last week. The state was very happy to have a beer who didn't try to negotiate. She was speechless for the first time since I'd met her. Now, about those violation notices you gave me, I said, pulling out the papers she'd handed me a month ago. I've reviewed them with my lawyers. Turns out, issuing fake HOA violation notices to someone who's not in your HOA is actually illegal. It's called harassment, and it's a misdemeanor. I handed her a new set of papers. These are counter-violation notices. You're hereby banned from accessing my property for any reason. You're also banned from accessing any part of Crystal Lake, which I now own. The best part was watching her realize that she'd created this situation herself. If she'd just left me alone to fish in peace, I never would have known the lake was for sale. This is insane, she finally managed to say. You can't just buy a lake because you're mad at the HOA. Watch me, I said, and Linda. There's one more thing. I pulled out my final surprise, a legal document I'd had prepared. I'm filing a restraining order against you. You're not allowed within 500 feet of my property, and you're not allowed to contact me or any of my neighbors about HOA matters. Violation of this order will result in your arrest. She stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Oh, and about that fishing tournament I mentioned. I'm making it an annual event. The first annual Crystal Lake Fishing Tournament will be held next month. Entry is free for all lake residents, and there will be prizes for the biggest fish caught. From private docks, Linda Morrison turned and walked back to her SUV like she was in a daze. She sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes, just staring at the papers I'd given her. When she finally drove away, she didn't speed or gun the engine. She drove slowly, like someone who just realized their entire world had changed. Within a week, half the neighborhood had reached out to me. Turns out, Linda Morrison had been making their lives miserable for years. She'd fine people for having dock lights that were too bright, for storing kayaks in the wrong place, for having barbecues that created excessive smoke visible from the water. Old Bill called me first. "Mike, I heard what you did. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been wanting to put my fish cleaning station back for 3 years. Put it back, Bill. Fish cleaning stations are now officially encouraged under the new lake management policies." The Johnson family from across the cove came by with a bottle of wine. "Linda Morrison fined us last year for letting our kids swim too close to other people's docks. She said their laughter was disrupting the tranquil lakefront atmosphere. Tell your kids they can swim wherever they want now. In fact, I'm thinking about installing a floating dock in the middle of the lake just for kids to play on." I hosted a neighborhood barbecue on my dock the next weekend. 23 people showed up, including 3 families who brought their kids to fish for the first time in years. We grilled the fish we caught, shared stories about Linda Morrison's greatest hits, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. Pete from the bait shop brought beer and stayed until midnight sharing fishing stories. "Never seen anything like it," he said. "Woman tried to control a lake she didn't even own. Takes a special kind of arrogance. Linda Morrison tried to take me to court, claiming I was interfering with established community standards. The judge took one look at the case, saw that I legally owned the lake, and dismissed it with prejudice. Her lawyer actually apologized to me afterward. My client was misinformed about the legal situation," he said. "She thought the HOA had some kind of water rights claim. The Crystal Lake HOA dissolved 6 months later when they couldn't find anyone willing to take over Linda Morrison's position. Turns out, when you can't control the thing you built your power around, people stop taking you seriously. I still live in my cabin. I still fish from my dock every morning. But now I have neighbors who wave when they see me, kids who ask if they can fish from my dock, and a whole community that learned what happens when you try to control something that isn't yours. The lake is more alive now than it's ever been. There are kids learning to fish, families having barbecues on their docks, and people actually enjoying the water instead of tiptoeing around arbitrary rules. Linda Morrison moved away last spring. I heard she joined an HOA in Florida where she can terrorize people about their lawn heights instead of their fishing habits. As for me, I'm thinking about buying a few more lakes. You know, just in case. But honestly, the best part isn't the revenge. It's sitting on my dock every morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my lake, knowing that sometimes the good guys actually win. If you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen who thought she could control your life, drop a comment and tell me your story. I love hearing about people who stand up to bullies, especially when they have the resources to make it stick. And if you enjoyed watching Linda Morrison learn that money talks louder than clipboards, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who got exactly what they deserved. Trust me, I've got plenty more where that came from.